hill to the temple precinct was steeper than Alarka had ever remembered it. She had climbed it in better years only as any city woman climbed any necessary rise, cursing under her breath in winter, skirting puddles in spring, glancing up at the black towers to judge the hour by the bells, and then forgetting them again. The precinct had been part of Vere's silhouette then, no more intimate to her than the Hall of Measures or the East Wall, one more stern piece of the city's face, made for other kinds of people. Now every step toward it felt like being drawn by a chain she had not consented to wear. Markiah walked at her left, one hand on his horse's reins, the other free, in case she stumbled. He did not touch her unless she faltered badly enough to need it. His restraint was almost as oppressive as pity would have been. She could not have borne pity. She could scarcely bear the steadiness of him. Her right arm throbbed within the black binding from knuckles to below the elbow, each pulse seeming to strike bone directly. The emergency working he had done in Ashmarket had stopped the loose, sickening motion of shattered pieces, but it had not given her back a useful arm. It felt too heavy and too fragile at once, as though iron had been poured under the skin and left there hot. Her fingers lay numb at the tips and screaming at the joints. When the pain sharpened, her whole hand seemed to remember the white blast and flinch from it. Rain silvered the stone steps ahead. Behind them the city spread down the slope in wet roofs and dim lamps, the timber wards smoking faintly under mist, the river a darker band beyond. Somewhere eastward, beyond the rise of Blackstone and the intervening streets, Louva lay under other hands than hers. The thought had no end to it. It returned, and every return was fresh. At the summit, the precinct walls rose out of the dark like a cliff made by judgment rather than weather. The stones were black basalt, close-fitted and old, the joints fine enough to vanish in rain. 2 towers flanked the gate, square and plain, without the decorative vanities of noble fortresses. Iron lanterns burned in recessed niches. Above the arch, carved into the stones so deeply that centuries had only darkened it, hung the emblem of Kurzeth, balanced scales above a straight descending blade. The great bronze-bound doors within the gate stood shut, but not defensively shut. Rather, they seemed the natural conclusion of the wall itself, as if secrecy and severity had been quarried together from the same mountain. A bell sounded from somewhere above and behind those walls, one measured stroke, then another, perfectly spaced. After Ashmarket's ragged clamour, it was almost unbearable in its correctness. Markiah gave his name to the gate wardens without raising his voice. They knew him before he spoke. One took in his mud-splashed armour, the drying soot along his cloak hem, Alarka's bound arm, and the look on her face, and straightened as if something in the night had just reached the walls and become official. The other's gaze flicked to Alarka's left hand. She had not realized she had curled it protectively against her body until then. He looked away at once, which told her enough. The doors opened inward, on disciplined hinges. Warmth did not greet her. Neither did incense, nor any soft temple sweetness of wax and flowers, such as lesser shrines, employed to persuade the heart it had entered holiness. The air inside was drier than the rain outside, and colder in a different way, stone-cool, iron-cooled, carrying the scents of lamp oil, wet cloaks, old ash, parchment, metal, and the faint medicinal bitterness of places where wounds were cleaned rather than romanticized. The gate hall was long and vaulted. Black piers rose into ribs overhead. Iron braziers burned in wall niches, their light controlled and steady. Beyond lay another arch and a shadowed court open to the sky, where rain traced bright lines down a central statue too dark to read at first glance. Footsteps echoed differently here. Even grief sounded smaller against stone built to outlast generations of it. 2 novices in plain dark robes crossed the far end of the hall, carrying ledgers between them. At sight of Markiah they halted. At sight of Alarka they did not know what to do with their eyes. "Wake, infirm Seln," Markiah said to one of the gate wardens. And the night registrar? Quietly. The man bowed and went. To whom shall I report the Ash Market matter, sir? Asked the other. Markiah did not pause to consider. To Justicia Provost Helion when he wakes. If he does not wake easily, wake him harder. The magistrate has civil authority over the lane and its dead, but the manifestation and the murder do not remain civil alone. The gate warden inclined his head. And send 2 sworn brothers with a bier and sealcloths to Ashmarket, Markiah said. They are to receive the dead clockmaker's apprentice from the magistrate's hand after witness is completed. He is to be brought to the hall of silent witness. Alarka turned her head sharply. Markiah continued before she could speak. He is to be accorded order honours at burial. Note the cause plainly. Unlawful public killing, precipitating the rise of a justiciar chosen. The gate warden's face changed, not surprise exactly, but the flinch of a man hearing a rare form spoken aloud. Yes, sir, he said. It struck Alarka then, with abrupt and almost absurd violence, that they were speaking of Louver in the same tone one used for a sealed case or a fallen knight. Brought, accorded, cause plainly noted. The words entered her bruised mind and found no place to rest. He was not yours, she said. The hall took her voice and returned it in smaller, harder echoes. Markiah looked at her. No, then do not. Her throat tightened around whatever came next. Do not make him into some temple matter because your god came late. The gate warden lowered his eyes and backed away, wise enough not to remain within the circle of that grief. Markiah's expression did not change. He became temple matter the instant the god answered over his body, he said. That does not make him less yours. It makes him dead. Yes. No comfort. No denial. The truth again, offered with the same infuriating steadiness as if truth were always useful simply because it was true. He gestured toward the inner hall. Come. She wanted to refuse merely because the word came from him in that tone. Instead she walked, because if she stood still, the whole night might collapse on top of her. The inner court was open to the rain. A square of black stone with a narrow rill cut through its centre, carrying water from lion-headed spouts into a grated channel. At the middle stood the statue she had not made out from the gate hall, not the god in human likeness, but an abstracted pair of scales, carved from one block of black basalt, each pan empty, the beam perfectly level, despite weather and years. Lamps burned at the 4 corners of the plinth. Their flames did not gutter in the rain. Arcades lined the court on all sides. Behind one, clerks' tables. Behind another, doors of ironwood and bronze. Beyond the third, stairs leading down. People moved under those arches without haste and without idleness, each step seemingly aware of rule. A woman in a dark mantle passed carrying a tray of bandage rolls and did not gawk. A young knight in half-fastened mail came from a side passage at a run, saw Markiah, and checked so sharply that one boot squealed on wet stone. Sir, not here, Markiah said. Later. The young knight's glance took in Alarka's arm, then her face. Something like alarm crossed his own, before discipline flattened it. He bowed and kept moving. Alarka was aware of herself as the others must see her. Mud to the hem, rain-damp hair sticking to her temples, tavern coat under a borrowed cloak, one arm bound black and held against her body like damage barely contained. Common-born, exhausted. Wrong for this place in every visible particular. And yet the place had opened for her. That, more than the walls, made the precinct feel unreal. They brought her through a narrow corridor where iron lamps burned in brackets and into a chamber of dressed stone that seemed halfway between a workroom and an infirmary. Shelves held folded linens, splints, ceramic jars, stoppered bottles. A brazier glowed low. The table at the centre was not polished. It bore old knife scores and faint stains worn pale by scrubbing. A basin steamed on a stand beside it. Infirma Seln entered before Alarka had properly taken in the room. She was an older woman, spare as a reed and twice as unbending, wearing a dark gown under a leather apron. Her hair, iron grey, was coiled into severe knots and pinned with 2 plain iron needles. The hands she washed at the basin before touching anything else were square-palmed and scarred. Not decorative hands either, working hands, healing hands. The kind that had known soldiers, fractures, crush wounds, and the stubborn foolishness of people who mistook survival for readiness. Her gaze moved once over Alarka and settled on the arm. "Who bound it?" she asked. "I did," said Markaya. "With what verse?" "He gave it." Seln nodded once, more to the work than to the man. Better than losing it in the lane. That was the intention. She set down a tray of tools and cloths. And now the intention becomes more difficult. Alarka did not like the way they spoke over her, as if she were already half a patient and half a problem. "I can stand," she said. Seln looked up. Her eyes were dark and practical. "Can you?" "I did not ask whether you could stand. I asked whether you could listen." Alarka stared at her. "Sit," said the infirmer. Markaya drew a stool with his boot. Alarka sat because the room had begun to tilt at the edges again, and because the movement of lowering herself jarred the arm so badly she nearly bit through her own lip. Seln cut away the outer wrapping with small, sharp shears. Each snip brought cold air to skin that had become used to heat. Underneath, the first black binding remained tight around the hand and forearm, stiffened by sacred residue and dried rain. When the infirmer began to unwind it, pain woke further. "This will be slower than the lane," Seln said. "Not gentler, slower." Alarka felt the first strip peel from swollen flesh and sucked a breath between her teeth. "Was it bone alone?" Seln asked Markaya. "No. The force passed through the strike. Hand first, then forearm. I held the radius and ulna as near alignment as I could. I made no promise beyond viability." "You were wise for once." Markaya's mouth moved very slightly. "I will record the compliment." Seln ignored him. She worked with patient precision, unwinding, supporting the arm from below with a padded brace the moment the first constraint loosened. Where the cloth lifted fully, Alarka saw her hand and wished she had not. The swelling had risen grotesquely across the back of it. The knuckles were blotched purple-black. The wrist had the wrong breadth and shape. Bruising climbed the forearm in dark bands. Though the limb no longer hung ruinously loose as it had in Ashmarket, it looked like something that ought not belong at the end of a living body. "That is mine?" she heard herself say. Seln did not answer immediately. She was pressing with 2 fingertips along the forearm, measuring heat, giving tiny corrections to the splint beneath, noting where Alarka flinched and where she did not. At the base of the thumb, Alarka made a strangled sound. "Yes," Seln said then, "and it will remain yours if you are obedient in the few ways obedience matters." Alarka almost laughed. The sound came out wrong. "Can you mend it?" she asked. Seln glanced at Markaya once, perhaps to gauge how much had already been said. "I can keep you from losing more," she said. "I can improve what was done in haste. I can reduce swelling, set what shifted, brace tendon against further insult, and call on the judge's discipline where flesh may still answer it. I cannot make this arm uninjured because it inconveniences you." "Inconveniences? It is not a miracle house," Seln said. "It is an infirmary." Markaya had moved to the far side of the table. He stood within reach if needed, beyond reach if not. Alarka hated that she noticed. Seln palpated farther up the forearm. At one point, something clicked under the skin in a way that made Alarka's vision flash white. "Hold her shoulder," the infirmer said. "I can hold my own." Then Seln twisted the wrist. Minutely, and pain leaped clear through her, into the back of her teeth. She lurched forward with a hoarse cry. Markia's hand came down on her left shoulder, not bruising, not soothing, merely enough weight to keep her from pitching off the stool. "Stay," he said. The word hit some raw place in her. Stay, as though staying had ever saved anyone. Seln slid thin, padded boards beneath the arm. "The carpal line is a wreck," she murmured, mostly to herself now. "2 metacarpals cracked through. Wrist better than I feared." Forearm splintered and forcibly answered. She looked at Markia. The blast ran cleaner than it should have. Meaning, if it had gone less cleanly, she would not have fingers to argue with. Alarka swallowed hard against a surge of nausea. Seln turned to a shelf, took down a ceramic pot, and opened it. The room filled with the smell of bitter herbs and iron filings. She mixed the salve with a few drops from a dark bottle and worked it between her palms before laying the heat of it along the bruised arm. The relief was not kindness, only subtraction. The shrieking edge retreated enough for deeper pain to be named separately. "Drink," said Markia. He handed her a small cup. The liquid in it was brown and smelled of bark and cloves and something medicinally sharp. "What is it? If you ask many more questions, I will have the infirmer answer them." She drank. It was vile. Seln set out new wrappings, softer linen, thin iron splints etched with minute grooves, a broader brace of dark wood shaped to the arm, and a narrow seal plate stamped with the scales of Kurzeth. She began to work those in around the fresh salve. "Listen to me now," she said. The binding he put on in the lane kept the bones from drifting apart and the flesh from devouring itself around them. That is the difference between an arm you may someday use and one you carry dead from the shoulder down. But lane work is not healing. It is refusal to lose the limb before dawn. Do you understand? Alarka stared at the dark bruise rising over her own skin. "Yes, good. Now, hear the rest. Sacred force does not excuse matter. Bone still knits as bone knits. Tendon still scars if inflamed. Swelling still crushes what it should not. If you think that mark in your left hand grants you contempt for any of this, I shall tell Markia to tie you to the bed." Alarka looked up sharply. "You know about the mark. In this precinct?" Seln said. "Nothing arrives bleeding and stays secret for long." Markia said, "Enough." Seln did not seem rebuked. "Enough will be when the splints are on." She bound the new brace in place, laying the etched iron strips along the most damaged lines, the wooden support cradling the wrist and forearm so the hand rested half-curled. Each layer changed the pain again, turning chaos into weight, but never into comfort. When she pressed the seal plate against the outer wrap and murmured a few quiet words over it, the metal warmed and fixed itself there as if the linen had grown around it. Alarka's breath was unsteady. The bitter draught had softened the edges of the room, but not enough to blur what mattered. "Could you have saved him?" she asked. Silence gathered around the question like water around dropped iron. Seln did not pretend to mistake her meaning. "No." "Markia?" she said without looking at him. "No. If you had been at the beam, he would not have hung," Markia said. "Not because he could have restored breath after the fact. Not because gods rewound rope, only because he might have prevented men from acting while they still feared interruption. It was worse, perhaps, than any gentler answer." She laughed once, a broken, useless sound. "So the difference was only that no one strong enough arrived in time." "The difference," said Markia, "was that many people chose cowardice in small steps until they became killers together." She turned her head toward him. "And your God answered after." "Yes, as if that is justice." His face remained still, but there was something weary in the stillness now, as if he had asked some version of that question himself and never received a warmer reply than truth. "No," he said, "it is not." Seln tied off the last bandage. "Do not make theology in my workroom," she said. "It spoils attention. She rose and flexed her own fingers. The arm is better bound than it was, not sound, better. She needs rest, broth, and no heroics. Her gaze cut to Alarka. The next time sacred force takes that arm unprepared, I may not keep the hand. There will be no next time, Alarka said at once. Neither Sel nor Markiah answered that. A knock sounded at the door jamb, and a man in dark registrar's robes waited there, with a writing case tucked under one arm. He was middle-aged, thin, and careful in the way of those who had spent long years handling words that outlived emotion. A novice stood behind him holding a lantern and trying not to stare. "The night register is awake," the clerk said. "I was told the matter bears immediate entry." "It does," said Markiah. "Then I require names, witness of manifestation, injuries, and preliminary claim of jurisdiction." He said it as if listing common household needs. Alarka felt sudden fury rise at the sound of the orderly words. "He's dead," she said. The clerk inclined his head. "So I am told." "Told?" Markiah stepped between the clerk and her anger without quite interposing himself. "Registrar Ozan," he said, "you will have what is required. Not all of it this minute." Ozan's eyes moved from Markiah to Alarka's bound arm and back. "The mark is confirmed?" "Provisionally," Markiah said. "Seen directly." "By whom?" "Myself." Ozan absorbed that in silence. Then, in a lower tone, "And the woman?" "I remain capable of hearing my own name," Alarka said. The clerk looked at her properly then, perhaps expecting fragility, perhaps something more sanctified. What he found was a mud-streaked commoner with swollen eyes and a temper sharpened by loss. To his credit, he did not let surprise show long. "Then I ask your name for record." "Alarka." "House?" "None." "Trade?" She almost said bartender from spite. Instead, tavern work, guard work. The quill moved over waxed parchment. "Patronym?" She stared at him. Ozan waited only long enough to note the absence and write without it. "Very well. Time of manifestation?" "Approximately 3rd quarter after 9th bell." "Location?" "Ashmarket Old Wayhouse Yard." "Immediate causal event?" Alarka's mouth opened and closed again. Immediate causal event. Louver hanging from a beam, golden eyes open to nothing, her fist meeting the jaw of the man who called murder, order, light, bone. "Thunder." "Enough," Markiah said. Ozan's glance rose. "She will give formal statement after sleep, and after the provost hears Ashmarket witness," Markiah said. "For now, record this. Manifestation arose at direct physical contact during acute grief and rage in response to unlawful killing under mob action. Backlash shattered dominant arm. Casualty: 1 deceased by hanging prior to manifestation. 1 principal rioter gravely injured by force, discharge and under guard. The quill scratched. Registrar Ozan said, "And the deceased?" Markiah answered before Alarka could fight the clerk for asking as if inventory were at issue. "Louver, apprentice clockmaker of Bellmaker's Rise, in service to Master Nerat Vale. Part outsider heritage visible. Seized while attending chapel work at Ashmarket. Papers were torn by assailants. He is under posthumous protection of the order and will be entered accordingly." The words "posthumous protection of the order" were so formal they seemed to come from somewhere older than either man. Alarka's head snapped toward Markiah. "You cannot protect the dead." "No," he said quietly. "But we can refuse to let the city bury him in shame." Something in her expression must have shifted, because Ozan lowered his gaze and wrote more carefully than before. "Under what honors?" the registrar asked. Markiah said, "Witness honors under the scale." Full notation that his murder precipitated the manifestation of a justiciar chosen. The novice behind Ozan took in a breath before catching himself. Ozan's quill paused only a fraction. "That form has not been opened in my tenure." "Open it now." "Yes, sir." The register closed with a strap. Ozan bowed once. "The provost will want sight of the mark before sunrise." "He will have it," said Markiah. When they were alone again, Alarka said, "Do not call me that." Markia's attention was on the damp cloth Selm was using to clean his hands of salve residue. "Call you what?" "Justicia, anything. It is not a call, it is a condition. I never asked for it. No." He dried his hands and set the cloth aside. "That does not alter it." She wanted to strike him for the calmness of that, and the fact that she could not even clench her ruined hand made the desire more bitter. Selm had moved to the brazier and was pouring broth from a lidded pot into a bowl, ignoring them both, with the competence of one long used to letting wounded people exhaust themselves against truth. She set the bowl in front of Alarka without comment and returned to her shelves. "I don't want broth," Alarka said. "Then do not want it while drinking," said Selm. Alarka would have refused on any other night. The smell of it, thin meat stock, salt, onion, a thread of bitter green rose into the emptiness under her ribs and reminded her she had not eaten since Louva's stew in the tavern. Half watched over by soldiers who later helped hang him, the memory turned her stomach. She drank anyway, because the bowl trembled in her left hand, and because faintness had made a nuisance of itself. Markia waited until she had taken enough not to fall over, then said, "There is one more thing before you are lodged. I am not staying." He regarded her for a long moment. "You are?" "No. If you attempt the hill in your current state, you will likely collapse in the lower court. If you reach the city, you will find every watchpost already talking. By morning there will be magistrates, order officers, and perhaps zealots at the cinder lamp door asking after you. The mark alone forbids it. The injury makes it impossible. The investigation requires you. The order claims you. Choose whichever reason you hate least." She put the bowl down too hard, slopping broth over her thumb. "Claim me? Like the crowd claimed Louva?" The silence after that was so immediate and complete that even Selm stopped moving. Markia did not flinch, but something in his face closed, not against her, but against the carelessness grief had forced from her mouth. "No," he said. "Not like that." She looked away first. At length Selm said, into the quiet, "If you mean to keep her upright for the next chamber, take her now before the draft does what drafts do." Markia nodded. He led Alarka not deeper into the precinct at first, but downward. The stairs were worn in the middle by generations of feet. Black stone gave back the lamplight in dull gleams. The air cooled further below ground and picked up the faint smell of limewash, old metal, wax, and something cleaner than burial earth, yet kin to it. She knew before he told her where he was taking her, and every muscle in her back tensed. "I said I'm not leaving him," she muttered. "You are not," Markia said. The stair opened into a long, low chamber with ribbed ceilings and arched recesses along both sides. Lamps burned behind horn panes set in iron brackets, their light amber and still. The floor was black flagstone, freshly washed. At the far end hung a curtain of plain, dark cloth, embroidered only at the hem with the scale and blade seal. This was not a crypt, not yet. It was the room before the grave. The hall of silent witness held 3 biers. 2 were empty. On the third lay a long form under a dark shroud, bound at feet and chest with narrow white straps. At the head and foot of the bier stood iron lampstands, both lit. Beside the body rested a small tray containing a clay tag, a registrar's wax seal, and a folded strip of parchment. Alarka stopped walking. Louva had been washed. That was the first thing the room told her. The mud was gone. The soot was gone. His hair had been combed back from his brow. Someone had straightened the lines of his body beneath the shroud with careful, ordinary mercy. Only the bruising at the throat remained visible above the wrapping, stark and impossible to forgive. His face was uncovered. In the steadier light below ground, he looked younger than he had in life a day ago, stripped of motion, worry, and the 1,000 small reflexes by which a living person holds himself against the world. His hands had been placed over his middle. Placed. That word should have comforted. Instead, it nearly drove her to her knees. Those hands, stilled and arranged by strangers, fingers that had measured gears and shared figs and brushed flour from her sleeve, now folded into temple order. Micaiah did not touch her. He let her cross the chamber alone. She went to the bier and stood over Louva until standing failed and became kneeling. The shroud was dark wool, rougher than fine funerary cloth, but impeccably clean. At the breast had been pinned a small iron scale, no larger than her thumb, not as ornament but as sign. Not knight's insignia, not a warrior's honours. Something else. A witness marker, perhaps. A claim that he had died under the sight of law, whether law had saved him or not. He should be in his own clothes, she said. He is, Micaiah answered from behind her. The shroud lies over them. That should not have mattered. It did. She put her left hand lightly over Louva's folded ones through the wool, and felt nothing of warmth now. Stone-cool cloth. The shape beneath. Absence, formalized. When? She asked. An hour ago. The magistrate released the body under joint seal after witness. Micaiah's voice remained low, suitable to the room. I sent brothers from the gate and a mortuary pair from below. She stared at the iron scale pinned to the shroud. And this. The order does not reserve honour for its own dead alone. He wasn't of the order. No. Then why? Micaiah came closer, stopping at the bier's foot rather than crowding her side. Because he was killed under mob pretense while law watched and failed. Because the manifestation rose over his body. Because the birth of a justiciar chosen is not a private weather event. It leaves debt. His gaze rested on Louva's still face, and when he spoke again the words had the weight of something older than policy. He will be buried at dusk, with witness honours under the scale. Not as a knight, not as chattel of the temple, as one whose wrongful death called judgment into the world and must not be denied by silence. Alarka's throat worked. He would have hated the phrase. A flicker of something almost human, almost humour, passed across Micaiah's mouth and vanished. Likely. He would have said it sounded like a clerk trying to put grief in a box. Likely that too. She looked down at Louva's face and for one impossible instant expected the corner of his mouth to answer. The stillness that met her was so complete she felt physically cold. There should have been no need for any honour, she said. He should be sleeping above a clock shop and complaining about drafts. Yes, said Micaiah, and instead he is here because people wanted someone to blame for a wrong bell and a sick child and their own rot. Yes, and your God chose that moment. Yes. She turned on him then, grief finally finding the nearest structure it could strike without collapsing. Why? The word rang small in the hall and did not diminish for that. Micaiah did not answer at once. He seemed to think before offering anything, as if careless speech in this room would be a kind of profanity. I do not know why gods answer when they do, he said. I know only that they do not always answer in the way men call just. That is not good enough. No. Then what is the use of him? At that, Micaiah's eyes sharpened, not offended. Alert. If you ask what use a god is in the hour after murder, he said, the honest answer is often less than grieving people deserve. She laughed, once, bitterly enough to cut. You say that inside his own walls. I say it because I serve him inside his walls. He held her gaze. You think I honour him by lying? The question struck her harder than it should have. Micaiah's voice lowered further. Listen to me carefully, Alarka. Choosing is not proof that you were right in everything you felt tonight. It is not proof that rage is wisdom. It is not reward for suffering, nor pardon from error, nor compensation for the dead. It is burden, summons, obligation, danger. If you survive it, and if the order does not fail you, you may one day become fit to wield what answered. If not, the mark will make you ruinous to others and to yourself. She looked at him through a blur that had nothing to do with the infirmer's draft. "All I wanted," she said, "was for him not to hang." Markia's face changed then, not into softness, but into something graver still. "I know," he said. It was the first time anyone had said that without trying to direct her away from it. She bent forward and put her forehead against the edge of the bier, careful of her arm, and remained there until the stone-cold wool smell of the shroud and the faint soap scent from Luva's washed hair were all the world allowed. At length Markia said, "The registrar waits above. I don't care. You will." "No, you will," he repeated, "because if witness is not made now, others will make it for you, and they will do it badly." She did not move. "Grief," Markia said after a moment, "is not improved by clerks. I know that. But witness matters because the mob already has a story. It will spread by dawn. If law arrives too late, and record arrives later still, lie becomes the first architecture of memory." She closed her eyes. Luva would have understood that. He had always understood systems, the way misaligned teeth in a gear could grind a whole mechanism false. It was infuriating that he had to be dead for the truth of that to remain. She lifted her head. "I hate this place. That is not uncommon the first night. I may hate it the 10th. That would also not be uncommon." He waited while she stood. Before she turned away, she touched Luva's folded hands one last time through the wool. "Dusk?" she asked. "Yes, I will be there, if the arm and the provost allow it." She looked over her shoulder with something like murder in her eyes. Markia seemed, absurdly, to approve of the strength of it. The chamber above was smaller and plainer than she expected, for something called the night register. No sanctum, no jeweled shrine. Merely a stone room with a long table, 3 lamps, shelves of bound ledgers, and a bronze gong hanging silent in one corner. The registrar Osen sat at one end, with fresh parchment. Beside him stood another man, in a sleeveless black overrobe marked at the collar with embroidered scales. Older, broad-shouldered, high-browed, the sort of man whose stillness came not from gentleness, but from long practice in judging when speech was worth the breath. "This is Justiciar Provost Helion," Markia said. Helion studied Alarka without ceremony. His eyes were pale and wakeful despite the hour. "You were brought in under Markia's seal," he said. "That secures you from mishandling tonight, not from scrutiny. Sit." She sat, because no one in this place seemed to use words as decorations. Helion took in the new brace on her arm, the dried mud still at her hem, the lack of deference in her posture, and finally her clenched left hand. "The mark," he said. Alarka did not open the fist. Markia spoke, not over her, but into the space before refusal hardened. "It must be entered." "What if I say no?" she asked. Helion answered, "Then it is entered as observed and concealed. Not a threat, a fact." She hated facts here. They came too cleanly. Slowly, she opened her hand. The faint emblem burned still at the center of the palm, a balance over a descending line, not bright now, but fixed into the flesh like memory laid under skin. In the lamplight it seemed neither wound nor pigment. Something claimed. Osen drew in a breath no louder than a page turning. Helion's expression did not alter, but his attention sharpened further. Markia said, "Seen first in Ashmarket immediately after manifestation." Helion stepped closer, not touching. "Pain?" "In the arm," Alarka said. "In everything. At the mark." She looked down. "Only when I look too long." He nodded once, as though some internal measure had been met. "There is no ceremony for this hour," he said. "Only record. By visible seal, witnessed manifestation, and nightly confirmation, Alarka, common born of Ver, is entered provisionally under the order's authority as justiciar chosen, pending fuller examination." The phrase landed with more weight than volume. Alarka closed her hand. Helion continued. "Understand what that does and does not mean. It does not mean sanctity. It does not mean office. It does not mean your anger was pure, because divine force rode within it. It does mean that Kurzeth has laid claim to your future in a manner the Order is bound to answer for. From this hour you do not stand only as citizen witness, but as a matter of sacred law. Sacred law did him great good tonight, she said. A lesser man might have bristled. Helion merely inclined his head once, acknowledging the wound in the statement without pretending it had missed. No, he said. It did not. He placed a hand flat on the table. Law names what may be done. Jurisprudence asks what justice requires when doing is not enough. Many in this city know the first, and invoke it loudly. Far fewer endure the second. His eyes met hers. If the mark remains on you, that distinction will decide whether you become an instrument of judgment or merely a sanctified cudgel. Markiah said nothing. That silence told her he agreed. Alarka's temper, exhausted though it was, found new life at the word merely. I'm not a cudgel. Not yet, said Helion. The room chilled by a degree she could not measure. Osen bent over the record, writing. The scratch of the quill seemed offensively calm. Alarka wanted to overturn the table, tear the ledgers, drive her bound arm through the ordered lamps, just to prove that structure could still break. Instead, she sat and breathed through the ache. Helion asked practical questions after that, and practical questions were their own kind of violence. Name of the dead, name of the master. Did Luva have kin in the city? Had Alarka seen who first laid hands on him? Had Derin spoken before the strike? Did she remember the sensation of the blast clearly enough to distinguish whether it originated in fist, heart, breath, or sight? She answered where she could, snapped where she could not, and at one point simply said, "He was hanging," in such a tone that even Osen's quill paused until Helion told him quietly, "Record the answer," as interrupted by distress. Distress. Another clean word with blood behind it. At last Helion closed the matter for the night. Ashmarket remains under seal until dawn. Review, he said to Markiah. Civil and order witness will be joined. Derin lives? For now, Markiah said. Good. The dead require accuracy. The living guilty require more. Helion shifted his attention back to Alarka. You are not to leave the precinct. You are not to carry weapons. You are not to attempt invocation, testing, prayer work, or any other fool's experiment with the mark. If you feel heat in the palm, ringing in the bones, or pressure behind the eyes, you report it. If you do not, and something breaks, I will know that also and be displeased. Alarka almost said she did not care whether he was displeased. The words died before they formed. The man meant them too literally. You will be lodged in the lower guest cells near the infirmary, Helion said. Not imprisoned, observed. Markiah will hold immediate charge. Alarka turned to him. You volunteer for this? Someone must. You sound delighted. I am not. That, at least, she believed. The audience ended there. Osen sanded the fresh writing and sealed it with black wax, impressed by a scale stamp. Helion departed without waste, already turning his mind toward whatever came next in a building that never slept fully because law and injury did not keep kind hours. Markiah led Alarka back into the corridors. The precinct had altered by degrees while she sat before the register. Dawn was not yet visible, but the building felt nearer waking. More lamps had been lit. Somewhere above, a chain ran through a pulley. The muted clank of armor sounded from a side hall. A pair of clerks passed carrying boxed documents sealed in cord. A knight knelt alone in a niche chapel beneath a bronze scale, head bowed, gauntlets set side by side on the stone as neatly as tools on a bench. Nobody looked idle. Nobody looked comfortable. They came at last to a short passage of smaller doors. These were not made for guests, Alarka said. No, the chamber Markiah opened for her was scarcely larger than Brinner's storeroom. A narrow bedstead, a washstand with basin and ewer, one stool, one wall niche with a lamp. One small high window cut through the stone, too narrow to admit more than a strip of paling sky when morning came. The blanket on the bed was clean and coarse. Everything in the room had been chosen for function. Nothing invited forgetting. "I am not a prisoner," she said again. Markiah set her borrowed cloak on the stool. "No, but if I leave?" "I stop you," she laughed without mirth. "That sounds near enough." "It is near enough for tonight." He moved to the door, then paused. From inside his cloak he drew a small object wrapped in plain cloth and set it on the washstand. "What is that?" "Your belongings from Ashmarket that were not evidence." He unfolded the cloth. Inside lay Luva's paper twist of dried figs, crushed flat and damp-stained but still tied, and the smooth little thinking stone from his workbench sill. Alarka stared. "The tools and the torn papers remained sealed for the inquiry," Markiah said. "These were not taken from the lane. They were brought from Bellmaker's Rise by the brothers who secured Master Nerat's shop after word was sent. The master asked that you have them." For the first time since Ashmarket, something in her face threatened to break without rage holding it together. "Is he alive? Nerat?" "Yes." "Did he know?" Markiah's answer took one heartbeat too long. "He knows enough." "Enough." Another careful cruelty of the night. Alarka picked up the stone with her left hand. It was exactly what it had always been. Smooth, grey, river-worn, fitting the curve of a thumb, because Luva had handled it often enough to teach even stone his habits. It was unbearable. "He'll think I should have kept Luva home," she said. "I do not know what he thinks." "I do." Markiah did not argue. "A temple boy will bring water and more broth after dawn. Selm will look at the arm again when the swelling decides whether it prefers obedience. You will sleep if you can." "I won't." "Then lie down anyway." He turned to go. "Markiah." He looked back. "If Derin dies," she said. "What then?" "Then his death is entered beside the others." "That's not what I mean." He understood her at once. "If you ask whether the blast becomes lawful because he helped hang Luva, no. If you ask whether his guilt vanishes because he was struck by divine force, no. If you ask whether I know yet what sentence justice requires of a man half killed by the same wrath that marked you, no." Alarka's jaw tightened. "I don't need lessons tonight." "No," he said, "but you need to hear this much. What happened through you was real. It was also uncontrolled. Do not mistake being chosen for being cleared." The words hit some bruised moral place in her where grief had already been telling itself easier stories. She hated him for finding it. She hated him more because a part of her knew he was right. He laid his hand briefly against the doorframe as if the stone itself were witness. "At dawn," he said. "The bells will ring the first proper hour after your old life ended. When they do, nothing will be mended, but many things will begin. Rest before that if you can." Then he left, and the door closed with a quiet weight that was worse than a slam. Alarka stood alone in the black stone chamber, the smooth thinking stone in one hand and the mark of Kurzeth hidden in the other, her right arm braced and throbbing, her whole body humming with exhaustion too jagged to become sleep. The lamp in the niche burned steady. Somewhere deep in the precinct, a door opened and shut. Somewhere farther below, perhaps in the Hall of Silent Witness, 2 lamps still burned at the head and feet of Luva's bier. She sat on the narrow bed because standing no longer served any purpose. The little parcel of figs lay flattened on the washstand beside the basin. She could see, absurdly clearly, Luva turning a fig stem between finger and thumb on the river stair, saying people were fond of fear when it spared them harder thought. She could see his eyes catching lamplight in the street before he turned toward Ashmarket. She could hear him correcting the bell's lag by half a breath. Without meaning to, she opened her left hand again. The mark lay in her palm, faint and implacable. She thought of the mob. of Darren flying backward in white gold light, of her own bones breaking beneath borrowed divinity, of Helion saying not yet, of Markiah saying not cleared, of Luva below ground wrapped in a shroud under an iron scale because the city had not allowed him the simpler dignity of an ordinary death. The bell for dawn began. It did not ring wrong. That was the cruelty of it. One stroke, then the next. Perfect intervals, iron measured against the sleeping city, each note moving through the precinct walls and into her bruised body like something pronouncing sentence. The sound entered the chamber, touched the brace around her ruined arm, touched the mark in her palm, touched the place where grief had not even begun to settle into shape. When the final stroke faded, Alarka understood with a cold certainty that she would not go back down the hill to the cinder lamp, or to South Post, or to the life in which bells were only hours and not commands. Below, in the hall of silent witness, Luva waited for burial with honours he had never asked for. Above, the black stone machinery of Kurzeth had already taken her in hand, and alone in the narrow chamber, with dawn beginning beyond the slit of the window and the mark burning faint beneath her skin, Alarka realized that the god had not rescued her from the night in Ashmarket. He had claimed her inside it.